Greetings, adventurers, and welcome to Skill Tree, where we learn how to do just about everything. Now, I have some really cool news for you. Those of you who've watched for a while might remember my epic fight with an assassin in the night during our Reckoning LARP. If you don't, you can check that out right here. We've actually gotten to know the person who played that assassin pretty well, and he's a really cool guy. And he just so happens to work for a really cool company called Bergschneider. They make LARP gear and run their own LARPs and are really just in this community. And since we really hit it off, he's been pulling us more and more into the whole LARP scene, like our LARP Obi-Wan Kenobi. Anyways, we started working together to try to find different ways to bring the joys of LARPing to you all and make it easier to get started. So, Bergschneider has offered to give our community an extra 15% off of everything in their store. Like, everything. That's amazing to me. Specifically to help you get the gear you need to go out and LARP and have fun. All you have to do is use the code SKILLTREE15 at checkout to get your 15%. And you can use that discount code as many times as you want, so go nuts. It's there for as long as I can tell. I don't know, we haven't put an end date on it. And it's not like they're sponsoring us. I don't have to like come up here and say nice things. It's just genuinely a cool thing they're doing for our community, so that's cool. Not only do they have this dope deal, but just watch this space. We have some really cool news coming your way. Very excited. But yeah, for sure, visit their store, check out all the cool stock they have. I fell in love with basically all of it, including the cloak that we're using for today's episode. Basically, I got this cloak here for the sole purpose of modding it to make the ultimate adventurer's cloak. So without much further ado, let's jump right into it and level up this skill. Alright, so this isn't a product review episode. I'm not getting sponsored, like paid to say anything nice about it. But let me just tell you how dope this cloak they sent me is. It's heavy and the material's really nice quality. Like at this point, I've made a few different cloaks and this is the first time I'm like, I have a legitimate cloak. Like, it's mine. I love it so much. It feels really good while it's on and I love the size of this hood. I'm a sucker for big hoods and this is big, but not so big you like get lost in it. Like my assassin's hood, bless that thing, but if it goes over my head, I'm lost. I was also sent some of these closures here, which are a design I've never seen before, but come on, those look super badass. It's not all sunshine and Skittles though, as this cloak is just way too long for me, passing my feet and sweeping across the floor. I can't take 2 steps without tripping on this damn thing. That being said, that's probably my fault. I ordered a large instead of a medium, which would probably actually be my size, just because I didn't know how it would land. And it's way easier to take away fabric than it is to add fabric, so I'm alright with this. Before cutting the fabric though, I decided to make my very first mod something super practical. And that is water resistance. I want this thing to be able to stand up to a torrential downpour. Now, since it's felted wool, it actually does a really good job being water resistant. Water tends to bead right off of it, but you can see it does start to soak in pretty quickly. I want to see if we can get this thing more on the waterproof side than the water resistant side. To make that happen, I ended up buying some of this Nike wax or Nick wax, I don't know how it's pronounced, that somebody on the Discord mentioned that I should try. It comes in a bunch of different varieties for different textiles and surfaces, but I ended up going with this polar proof one just because it's specifically made for like fleeces and I thought that would probably do the best job on a wool. And this stuff is super easy to apply as you can use it right in your laundry. You can just wash your clothes in it. So I started by just tossing the cloak in and getting a wash going. While that fills with water, I measured out the recommended amount. Now, if you have one of those machines where you can put soap in it ahead of time, like in a little drawer there, you don't need to do this. You don't have to wait for the water to fill up. Mine just doesn't. I use those tasty Tide Pods instead. Kids, don't eat the Tide Pods. Just don't do it. But opening up the machine once the wash water was full and just pouring this in seemed to work out fine for me. After letting it tumble dry low, it was time for another test. And look at how great that works. Again, now I'm not being paid by Nike wax, but this stuff is awesome. The water just rolls off. It doesn't soak in at all. You can use the damn thing as like a bucket in the hood. It's amazing. All right, so now that we have a cloak that can keep you dry while friggin' swimming, I guess, it's time to get to the real meat and potatoes of this mod. For some of these parts, I model everything on my mannequin, which you can learn how to build here. If you don't have one though, don't worry about it. You can just kind of use yourself. It's just easier on camera. So step number 1 was to figure out how short I wanted this thing to go. I ultimately decided on it being about mid-shin to try to keep it from dragging and snagging on every bush I pass by. This equates to me removing about 9 inches worth of material, so I went ahead and pinned up that much all along the bottom of the edge of the cloak. Then I cut along that fold to remove all of that excess material. This left me with a bunch of this extra fabric that I'm sure I'll find a use for somewhere. Now, because that raw edge will eventually start to fray and kind of get nasty, you really want all of your edges to be folded up and sewn into place. So that's what I do here, just folding up that cut edge at the bottom of the cloak and ironing it into position. Then I just added some pins to make sure it stayed in place. With that in position, I brought it over to my sewing machine and just locked that into position. This gives me a really nice clean edge all along the bottom of my cloak, which is now the perfect length. With it about mid-shin, I no longer have to worry about tripping on it or snagging on everything I pass by. Now, I don't know if any of you have read The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, but there's this wonderful point in which the protagonist Kvothe is given a cloak that has all these amazing pockets inside. He waxes on about how every really good cloak needs to have all these little tiny pockets. And that's always stuck with me, I agree. Pockets everywhere, I love pockets. So that's what this cloak needs to have. That said, I don't want to sew them directly to the wool because you're going to see the thread through the back side. It's just going to look kind of messy. So to get around that, I decided to line the whole thing. For this purpose, I got this really nice brown linen-like material from Joann Fabrics. To get the size right, I simply laid it across the floor and spread my cloak out right on top of it. Then I just used my scissors to cut all around the cloak, staying as close to the shape as possible and being careful to get all the curves like this neck loop here as cleanly as I can. This leaves me with a shape that perfectly mirrors what I'm looking for. Now again, we don't want to leave any raw edges, so all of those edges are going to be folded in. Since I cut it the exact same size of the cloak though, once I fold those in, I'm hoping that the edge will now line up exactly with the seam that's already on the cloak. That's the plan at least. Sewing isn't my strong suit. We'll see how it goes. Before I can attach it though, I need to attach all of my pockets to it. That's the whole purpose of this thing. And to attach the pockets, I really want it to drape over me so I know exactly where they'll all land. So to make that happen, I first pinned up the material to the cloak all the way around the edge just to keep it in place. Then I draped it over my mannequin so that it would lie roughly where everything will end up when I wear it. Now off camera, I went ahead and cut out some of these pocket shapes out of some paper. These aren't perfect, they're just paper I folded in half and eyeballed half of a pocket shape so that when I unfolded it, it would end up perfectly symmetrical. Then I just used a little bit of masking tape and put these in position where I thought they should land in the cloak. Now, aside from the 4 basic pockets that I kind of want to put all around the inside of this thing, I also wanted 2 larger pockets down kind of where my hands would go that could double as mittens. I know you're like, why the hell do you need mittens on this thing? But again, think of it, you're an adventurer, you're traveling, you're going to end up in the mountains, or the seasons are going to change on you and things are going to get colder. I live in the northeast of America. Things are getting colder and they're gonna keep getting colder. I'm afraid of the winter. So the idea is to have little built-in things that you can use just to keep your hands warm if you need to use them that way. Otherwise, they're just regular ass pockets. The way to make these pockets warm? Rabbit fur. To figure out the size I needed, I just wrapped this rabbit pelt around my hand. Then I used a sharp razor knife to cut the shape I needed from the back side of the hide. You generally want to cut hides like this from the skin side with a sharp razor. If you cut on the fur side or use scissors or something like that, you're going to cut a lot of that fur, which is going to end up everywhere and leave you with like weird bad haircut looks. As you can see, by cutting this way, we lost almost no fur at all, and the cut ends up looking nice and clean. With that cut to shape, I just use it as a template on a folded piece of fabric and cut around it, leaving an inch of seam allowance. This leaves me with the exact shape I need to make my pocket. Next, I fold it over the top edge of my pocket to give me a nice clean line to work with, and then iron that into position. Then it's off to the sewing machine again to make it permanent. With that locked in, I simply lay my piece of fur into place and then make a little taco out of everything, folding it all in half. Now knowing where the fur sits, I can fold that seam allowance into place and iron it to get a good crease. Then again, back off to the sewing machine. Now, once I've turned that inside out, I'm left with this nice little sack shape that'll act as the body of my pocket. All I have to do from here is stuff my fur lining in and fold over the outer edge. Doing this gives me my 2 fur-lined pockets that are all ready to be attached to my cloth lining. Again, just to make sure they fall exactly where I need them, I pin them into place while the lining is draped around my mannequin. These end up going roughly where like your pants pocket would go, right? Because that's just where your hands naturally fall. That's why they're there. With that together, you can now see all laid out the 4 pockets I'll be putting on this cloak, as well as the 2 hand warmer / extra pockets. Where those paper place markers are right now for the pockets, I'm gonna end up using that same lining material to actually make the pocket. To make those, I just use those paper guides as a template, giving myself a 1-inch seam allowance all around it. Then again, I folded in that top edge to make sure it was nice and clean, and to stop it from fraying. As you can see, after I lock these into place with some thread, it has a really clean, professional look. Next, I fold up the edges all around the pockets and iron them into place as well. This leaves me with this nice finished fabric look all the way around, and by doubling up that material, it'll strengthen the connection point. With those ready to go, I just line them up where the paper templates are so that they can land exactly where I need them to be. Then I pin them into place so they wouldn't move before I had a chance to get them to the sewing machine. Once there, I was really surprised at how easy it was to sew on a pocket. Like, this is my first time and I thought it would be a lot harder than it really was, but honestly, sewing a pocket on is pretty straightforward. And I think they ended up coming out pretty slick. Like, check that out, it's a pocket. Now, as for those fur-lined pockets, since they were so thick, I couldn't run them through my regular sewing machine, so I ended up using my leather sewing machine instead to get this job done. I just used it to sew along the edges to secure the fabric and the fur into place. This gives me this sweet little pocket that I could use to either warm my hands with or just put more delicate items in there. Also, by only sewing the sides, I leave myself the space behind the pocket to be able to slide longer items in, like swords and daggers. One last piece of flair I decided to add to the inside of this thing were these 2 little loops made out of chrome tan leather that I just hand stitched into position. These are specifically here just to accommodate my long stem pipe. Just a little extra something to bring me comfort on those long adventures away from home. Speaking of comfort, as I said before, I want this whole mod to be as useful as possible for whatever the adventurer might face out there on the road. And since we already called out trying to keep our hands warm, what else can we do when the cold really sets in? And y'all, I might have gone overboard with this one. To figure out the best kind of natural material to use for when it gets really cold, I end up pulling a page out of the playbook of the Nanette or the Samoyed peoples. They're indigenous to the northern Arctic Russia area where it gets really cold. We're talking negative 58 degrees cold. To survive, they actually incorporate a lot of reindeer fur to their clothing. It happens to have the insulating properties one would need to survive that kind of location. And lucky for me, Tandy Leather just so happened to have some. I can't express to you how luxurious this stuff is. Oh my god, it's so nice. It's crazy thick and soft and warm. Super crazy stupid warm. It's the warmest thing I own. It's incredible. The thought is to wear this bad boy like Game of Thrones style mantle, right? But not just drape it over you, I need to find a way to easily incorporate it into the rest of the cloak. Usually you have to like cut a slit up the middle and then a little circle where it goes around your head. But seeing as it seems to drape just fine without it being cut, I decided to forego that because then I could also use that whole piece as like ground cover to insulate me from the ground when I need to sleep. We want to get as many multitaskers as possible, no unitaskers. Alton Brown would be so proud. So to make this happen, I decided to add some loops as connection points. To figure out where these loops needed to go, I just felt out roughly where my collarbones are and added little pieces of tape to the hide right where those land. Then to further keep it into place, I figured finding a way to secure these bits that used to be the legs hanging down would be a good idea. So I added tape to the ends of these too where I thought loops might be able to go. Now to make these loops, I end up having these 4-inch long scraps of leather strap that I left over from the last project. The thought here is to fold them over and secure their ends together to form these little loops out of leather. To make sure they stuck together, I added some contact adhesive to either side of the strap. By adding the adhesive to the ends here, but leaving that middle unglued, I should be left with an open loop in the middle that I can use to tie into. Once the glue became tacky, I carefully put the ends together and held them in place for 30 seconds to form a strong bond. Now because the skin on the back of these things is quite thin, I didn't want to use like a rivet or just sew some small spots into it because that would put the pressure for it in a really small point that can pull through. The name of the game here is to spread that force out as much as possible. So to make that happen, I first use an emery board to rough up one side of my leather loop straps. Then I use those loops to trace in where they would land on my leather. That tracing is then used as a guide to know where I need to add more contact adhesive. Now I can stick on those leather straps right where they need to go and spread out that force that they'll have to bear across that whole piece of leather. For a little added strength though, I did decide to add a couple of stitches in there. To make this happen, I just punched 4 holes with my awl through the leather straps and the hide. Then using a wax thread with a needle on each end, I passed those needles through the holes from the back side. Then I crossed the needles and began passing them through the opposite hole to form a tight stitch. You'll notice here as I pull that stitch through, some of the fur gets caught under that thread. We don't want that. That's gonna look messy and it's gonna show off where that stitch is. It just won't be clean. To get around that, all we have to do is use a needle and run it along the edge of that stitch to pull out any hair that got stuck underneath. Once the hair's all been pulled aside, you can now tighten that stitch into place. After both needles have been passed through to the underside, I simply tie them together, cut off the excess, and then melt the ends to keep it nice and clean. And on the fur side, you can't even tell that there's a stitch in place. Looks really good. And using this method, I was able to lock in all of my loops in those areas that I marked off with my tape. To use these, I simply pass the ties used to secure the cloak through those loops, and then tie them together. This effectively connects that mantle to the cloak. And look at how badass that looks, way better than those Game of Thrones ones in my opinion. But hot damn, this thing is warm. Again, warmest thing I've ever worn. So hot. To help everything keep straight though and stop it from moving around on me, I did want to secure those little leg areas down to the bottom where I put those loops in. To do that, I just added a bit more tape to mark on the cloak exactly where those loops needed to land. Next, I busted out some of that fabric that I cut away from the bottom of the cloak earlier and cut out the finished seams so I can use them as more ties. This leaves me with this nice cord of fabric that's already strong and sewn together. To make it easier to pass those laces through my loops, I just wrapped the very ends with some wax thread a bunch of times and stuck the needle through the fabric to lock it into place. This gives me a hard end, almost like you'd see on a shoelace. Finally, I brought it over to the sewing machine and secured it into place right where I had placed that tape earlier. Now I can use this cord to tie those bottoms of my mantles and secure them into place on my cloak. This just helps it all move as one piece and stops the mantle from swaying around on my shoulders when I move. Even if I move really crazy, the mantle stays perfectly in place and moves with me. I'm really happy with the amount of freedom this gives me. Not only that, but should you face like really extreme cold and have to hunker down, all of those loops are symmetrical, so you can just flip the fur over and connect it to the inside of your cloak. Doing this takes that warmth factor up and dials it up to 1,000,000, effectively giving you this reindeer fur-lined coat. I swear to God, hottest thing I've ever worn. It will absolutely help you survive the harshest winter. It's fall here and it actually was really cold outside today. I was sweating bullets. So hot. So this works great, and because we didn't cut that reindeer pelt, we now have great ground cover for when it's time to settle in for the night. Efficiency! I love it. Alright, so now that we have that whole mantle part figured out, I finally feel comfortable actually attaching that lining to the cloak. As always, I first went around with my iron, folding up my edges, and pinning them into place so I have a nice clean line to work with. I can then line that edge up with the seam that's already on the cloak, pinning it into place as I go. Then it was a simple matter of hitting my sewing machine one more time and following that seam as cleanly as possible to lock everything into place. And again, for not sewing all that often, I really love how this came out. All of my pockets are in place and super useful. There's a spot for my pipe. My fur-lined pockets are ready to keep my hand warm and hold my blades. And I even ended up adding this nifty little leather strap for some last-minute innovation I came up with. So hear me out. It's crazy, but I think it'll work. Remember I had all this leftover fabric that I cut from the end of the cloak? Well, I figured this would make like a perfect like scarf or face wrap should it get cold or you need to hide yourself. Looking at you, rogues. The thought is by draping it over that piece of leather there and keeping it high up on the back, when you need it, you just reach behind you, pull it up and over your face, right? Then once it's there and you've got it into position, all you have to do is reach behind you like your lower back and pull it back down. That's gonna lock it tight into place and stop it from falling down. Then when you're done with it, you just take it off and you pull it back down and it just hangs down your back. Gone. Well, that's the thought. I don't know if it's gonna work. Otherwise, it's just like a leather thing you can use to hold up your cloak. I don't know. So with that, everything's together. Let's jump outside and see how this thing works. As you can see, it fits really nice, like the lining looks really slick, and I bet you didn't even notice, hidden in these folds here were my swords. This is a nice little sneaky feature for you rogue types out there. These little pockets make it super easy to store my sword and my dagger, and make it easy to draw quickly if you find yourself in the middle of a random encounter. Those little hidden pockets are good for everything, including these modern comforts that you might need to tuck away while in game. And of course, you shouldn't travel anywhere without your trusty pipe close at hand. Is it getting chilly? No worries, because these nice fur-lined pockets will keep your hands nice and toasty. Not only that, but let's protect our face from the wind chill. All you gotta do is reach back and pull out your scarf. Then just pull it back in again and tighten it around your face. I'm so glad that worked. That was a last-minute thing. I love it. Once you're done with it, you simply take it off and pull it back down. It just disappears, waiting for the next time you need it. Oh no, has the temperature dropped further? No worries, simply drape your bedroll across your back and strap that sucker into place. In a few moments, you have this regal-looking mantle. Not only will it keep you nice and warm, but will stand up to any ferocious battle you find yourself in, keeping pace with your every movement. Oh no, again, perhaps you find yourself in the heart of winter at the steps of the Frost Giant's castle. One more modification makes this into a perfect sub-zero temperature survival equipment, keeping you warm and alive long enough to complete your mission. And there you have it, my ultimate adventurer's cloak. I love this thing so much. Let me know if I did it right. Did I miss the mark on something? Is there something else you think would be more efficient or better to have in your ultimate adventurer's cloak? Leave in the comment section below. I want to see what you come up with. Again, thank you for Bergschneider for sending this cloak our way and for giving us that badass 15% discount. Seriously guys, check out what they have to offer. Link in the description below. It's one of those sites that like every page I'm like, oh, I want that. And now I'm gonna get it. 15% is not bad. Again, just make sure to use SkillTree15 to get that 15% discount. Also again, watch this space. We have really exciting news coming up in the next couple of weeks. I can't wait to share it with you. Now, I hope you liked this project. If you did, why don't you give me some of that like it love, and don't forget to subscribe so you know when I release new content. In the meantime, though, winter is coming. Stay warm, and keep leveling up, you. You stayed to the end screen. Thank you so much. YouTube loves it when you do that. Watching to the end is a great way to support this channel. Another great way to support this channel is by joining these people's noble ranks and becoming a Patreon member. Special shout out to today's high tier Patreon member, Gisla, or Gisla. Sorry if I butchered that. But thank you so much. It's people like you and all the rest of our Patreons that make this at all possible. I really appreciate everything you do for us. If you'd like to support this channel, consider joining our Patreon, link in the description below. Or you can go ahead and click on one of these videos here. I made them myself. I mean, Maddie helped too. She helped too. But click on one of them. They're both great. You stay to the end screens. Nope, it's too hot. It's too hot for this.